Hi, and welcome to the Omnist Hour. Today's session is going to be a rather special one for reasons that will be apparent after I tell you what the subject is and get into my subject matter. The title of this one is going to be Ramadan, Ascension Symptoms, Spirit Guides, and Plandemics. We're going to delve into some topics that I haven't really covered a lot since I started the Omnist Hour. Partly because I'd already covered them when I used to do my Facebook or YouTube live casts of my kind of karaoke stand-up comedy sermons, I guess is what I call them, back at the beginning of the pandemic. And hit some very interesting censorship issues when I did that. Seems like once they realized the kind of subject matter I was talking about, all of a sudden I attracted censorship from basically every country in the world. I don't know, 160 something countries on most things. And that's when I stopped doing karaoke in any of my shows, and started complaining about it on one of my pages in Facebook that I got inspired to call the Rob Trump Spelling Bee, which is a place that you can look for to maybe find remnants of those old karaoke shows if they're still around. Anyway, what's all that got to do with the subject matter? Well, it turns out that I am now having the experience of being an Omnist Muslim. Having come to Indonesia last year and married a very wonderful Indonesian lady, Aisha. Her real name's Sinsin, which I guess might be a bit off-putting for a lot of Westerners, and this ties into the subject matter as well. So bear with me as I get there. Anyway, tomorrow, April 1st, marks the beginning of Ramadan, the month-long fasting celebration, fasting holiday of the Islamic world. Now, for those of you that don't know much about Ramadan, and I don't know much either because I've only been a member of this faith. I would say I'm more of a Omnist Sufi than more fundamentalist Muslim. But anyway, what I know of it, I'll tell you a little bit about some of the interesting facts I've learned so far. It lasts a full month, and although probably it originally was set up that the really strong believers would actually fast the whole month, nowadays it basically is celebrated as a daytime of fasting, not only from food, but from things like fornication, other sorts of things that are maybe kind of questionable, unclean from a spiritual standpoint. Let's maybe call it that. So, between the hours of, I think they tell me 5 a.m. and 6 p.m., people for this special month don't eat. I don't drink, I don't think. And abstain from other things, although they go to work and do everything else like normal, which seems kind of strange to me, coming from, a background of Judeo-Christian Sabbath tradition, whether it's on Saturday or Sunday. I think seems like, from what I've heard, we kind of do about the same things on our weekly celebration. So, before I launch into all that, I want to start my presentation with something that might be a little sacrilegious to some very strict Muslims, but you'll see how it fits with everything maybe later on. I don't know. I've kind of got an idea where this is going, and we'll see if I get there. Who knows how far I'll get into it before my wife decides she needs me. There's a lot going on here, and she's having Ascension symptoms as of last night, pretty serious ones. So anyway, I'm going to start with a Ramadan prayer. They call them, let's see. Let me see if I can find that again. So I don't misstate. There's particular prayers or verses of the Quran that pertain to Ramadan. And I'm trying to find what they du'as. The du'as, which is, to my way of thinking, pretty similar to a psalm in the Jewish or Christian tradition, which, of course, the Muslims do believe in the Bible as well. They just have an additional book of Revelation that they've added to the Bible called the Quran, which I think is something I agree with, as I've written my own books of what I feel are revelation that are on Amazon and are listed in my about information from my page. Okay, so back to the subject at hand. I am going to give you a traditional Ramadan dua, short prayer, in 3 languages. The first language is, as near as we know, the first language of humanity. Of the first real humans, the first real Garden of Eden. And I'm going to leave it to some of my audience to guess what that language is. Tu gusti kulawargana iurang inakaamanan iman kaamanan sareng Islam sareng Gusti Allah nga berkahan anjun. Pardon my pronunciation. It's not a language I've been familiar with till now. The original in Arabic, for purists, I will try to butcher. I'm not an expert in Arabic either. Allahumma alilahu alayna bil amni wal iman wasalamati salamati wal Islam. Rabbi wa Rabbuka Allah. And here's the English translation. Now, why English? Well, that's my native language. I come from the U.S., although my background is, oddly enough, supposed to be French, Dutch, and German, and Norwegian. But when I ran a DNA test, it showed me as being mostly English. Go figure. The translation is, O Allah, make it a start full of peace and faith, safety and Islam. My Lord and your Lord is Allah. It's interesting. I never knew that the Arabic word for Lord was rabbi. Or I would have pronounced it rabbi. And it's all sorts of interesting things have come out of my research for this topic. But we're gonna shift gears now And I'm going to talk a little bit about a movie you may or not be very familiar with, a movie of the 80s. My kids loved it. It was very popular at the time. They even made a sequel called Wayne's World. Now, I'm not going to talk a whole bunch about it, but I'm just going to give you one piece of the whole premise of Wayne's World. There were these two crazy guys who had a local radio station where they do like skits and comedy and songs and basically have a good time. And the punchline of the whole movie, spoiler alert, is that unbeknownst to these two fellows when they started the movie, they had been selected somehow by beings from the future as their twin messiahs that had apparently brought this new future world of peace, love, and harmony to the world. And these beings from the future, one of them came back and assisted these two kids in becoming famous, and thus setting them on the path to this incredible future. Okay, I think that's enough of the spoiler. The odd thing is that seems to be pretty close to the truth of time, as I've come to discover it. And I'll tell you how that fits maybe later if I get to it. Otherwise, I'm sure I'm going to be talking about it again, or you can read about it in my writings. At any rate, the interesting thing about all this was that this theme probably was inspired by the fact that a lot of ancient writings, ancient words, names of gods, et cetera, names of messiahs, when used in the English language and pronounced naively, let's say, can be actually kind of funny or carry meaning that they wouldn't have carried otherwise. And what's interesting about this is Islam's name for God, Allah, comes actually the closest of all to the real truth of God. Because in English, Allah, God is a God of law, not a God of love or lore or any of the other things that God is attributed to. Giver of laws, not the enforcer. That's up to the rightful leadership of any place in the multiverse to enforce and to interpret God's laws in the way that they see fit for their culture. And that's basically how God works. God's not an almighty micromanaging enforcer or protector of the faithful, as so many would like to think he is. So let's look at some of the other names of God and what they're possible. The interesting thing about the Bible is that the so-called ineffable name of God has no consonants and has vowels that, when I look at them, I think I could find many different ways to pronounce them. Now, the traditional ways of pronouncing the names of God that are shown in the Bible. Well, of course, Elohim is translated as God, but we know from what I've told you before that, and any good biblical scholar will tell you, is that is plural and basically means the shining ones. And there are a few references to El in the Bible, and that would be the singular of that. Now, there's not a lot funny to be found in El, but it's interesting that it actually is the letter before what is or should be the middle letter of our current alphabet, M, which happens to be the first letter of my middle name, the first letter of my maternal grandfather's last name. In fact, both his first and last name were starting with M, Maris Mittling. I got his first name, one of the only of 5 children that got that middle name, which I passed on to my son as his middle name. And Mittling, oddly enough, is, I presume, meaning, and it supposedly comes from Norway, is where my maternal grandfather supposedly was born. Went to the U.S. Before World War I. Went over to fight in World War I on the American side, and ended up staying and marrying a French lady, which became the reason that they had to leave France when the occupation came. They were afraid they would be interned as dual citizens because their father had retained his American citizenship, and my grandmother, of course, was French. At any rate, that's L. Interesting. That's the only connection I could find there, so that's why I went into that strange story. Some of the other pronunciations you're probably familiar with. Yahweh. Yahweh is, I mean, if I was Wayne's World, guys, Yahweh, it's like this was way, no way. I think that is an expression that they actually used in Wayne's World. Somebody can check me on that, but it's kind of funny. What are some other ways that you could pronounce the IHWH? I think is how we write it in English. Can't write Hebrew, so I can't tell you what that is, but I think those are the letters that we transliterate. Well, Yua, Yua, Ayua, 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 Ayu, Ayu. Well, God is us. That's one way you could look at it. And there's a certain ring of truth to that, and there are many people who have come to believe in a brand of Christianity or Judaism or even Islam that says that God is us. This is the collectivist God of the communist God, if you will. Funny, funny, funny. You could also make a good argument, and there is an argument, that Yahshua, the name assigned to the Messiah, the Jewish Messiah, matches that pretty well too, which also is pretty close to Joshua, which could be another name of God. Lots of interesting things here. Another one I came up with, did you happen to know that the Jewish name for Eve is not Eve, but Hava, which is, if you were going to make God female, would be a pretty good way to make a god out of Eve, the first woman, or first completely human woman. In other stories, other accounts of that era, which we're not going to go into, the Sumerian tablets or other writings of Egypt or anywhere else, we could go on and on forever. But I just wanted you to think about, well, maybe let's add one or two more. Some people make a god out of Buddha. Buddha. Boo, we know what it means in English. It's like boo. And da is a shortened version of daddy. And some countries, some English-speaking countries, I think Scotland, still call their parent, their father, da. So down with God, which actually is a pretty funny and reasonable first description of the Buddhist cult. It's basically rejecting the karmic universe of the Hindu tradition and putting down the father, Brahma. Now, this is another one that's interesting. I just thought of this. Brahma, who is supposedly the first creator, the kind of top god of the Hindu pantheon, as it were, is in English also what we call a very wild bull, a Brahma bull. This is the kind of bull that is replicated in the honky tonks to see if you matching the rodeo to see if you can stay on long enough to win a prize. And bulls are, as we know, a very religious animal. The Apis bull. Apis was the final pagan god that was very popular just as Christianity was taking over, and this is a god they talk about in the movie Agora as Serapis, Serapis, which, when you think about it, in English, Serapis would be a pretty hilarious name for God, the god of the smart apes, the god of the planet of the apes. Oh, God, I could go on and on here, but we need to get moving. So I'll let you do your own research on more fun things there. At any rate, I think I've given you enough of a picture of how English could well be the final language of humanity, the language that we were created to take through the stars with us, as we seem to have done with Star Trek. I know this is going to offend many of the folks who have high hopes for Mandarin or any of the older languages that have once been sort of the chosen language, French, German, Latin, Farsi, whatever the original Persian language was, whatever the original, oh, you know what? I'm going to tell you what that first language was. I quoted there, Sundanese. Now, if you know anything about Sundanese, you know that it is what's left of the language of the Sundanese people, which are believed to have been the ones that were dominant in this area of Indonesia before the conquerors started coming. And this area has been conquered and reconquered by many, many folks who are interested in these islands. Indonesia and the Philippines are some of the most fertile, resource-rich areas. Oh, and some of the other pieces of uh, the original Sundaland, which wasn't so sundered as it is now. It was much more connected when the sea levels were lower and the continents were closer together. At any rate, I'm going to talk about one more strange thing along these lines. There's a play that you may not be familiar with, but which is a very famous play of the English-speaking theater called Waiting for Godot, Godot. I find that very interesting because that play is basically two guys sitting on a bench waiting for a third guy to come that never gets there. And they end up talking about a lot of philosophical topics that you wouldn't think two normal guys would be engaged in. Now, it's interesting, where did they get this name Godot? Well, I saw it and it automatically said to me, God ought. And that made perfect sense to me. Why? Ought is an English slang for zero. God zero. God zero. What would that be? The first God of a species that was still stuck being a 0.x version of itself. In other words, a species that hadn't become a God species yet, was still in testing, final testing, which is essentially what I've been telling you is what's been going on with the human species since it's existed. And in fact, with all species that ever existed, all the way back to before species existed, all the way back to the Big Bang, all a big test of a big plan of God, the first creator of the multiverse. Interesting. So let's hope we're getting close to God 1.0, because God ought. We don't need a zero. We don't need a zero for God anymore. Anyway, this leads me to a second prayer, a new prayer for Ramadan. A new prayer in the new holy language of the human race, English, from a new psalm written by, let's see, what's the guy's name? Frank Wildhorn, of all interesting names. Wildhorn. Wild trumpet. That's maybe one of those trumpets that we were told to watch out for. Perhaps. It's a song from a musical, Jekyll and Hyde. Interesting concept. Jekyll and Hyde sort of fits the mold of the Christ Antichrist pattern, which I think you'll become very familiar with if you study my work very much. It's a song called This Is the Moment. And I'm just going to say this as a prayer. I'm not going to sing it because I don't want to get involved with the censors on the internet. I think I've credited enough that I'm not going to get dragged down for merely reciting the words, which you can look up on the internet and which you can find versions of all over YouTube that don't seem to be blocked by anybody. At any rate, I'm not going to get angry about that anymore. This is the moment. For all these years, I've faced the world alone, and now the time has come to prove to them I made it on my own. This is the moment, my final test. Destiny beckon. I never reckon second best. I won't look down. I must not fall. This is the moment, the sweetest moment of them all. This is the moment. Damn all the odds. This day or never, I'll sit forever with the gods. When I look back, I will always recall, moment for moment, this was the moment, the greatest moment of them all. Sorry, I got a little teary-eyed on that one. Funny. Before we launch into the rest of the topic for the day, I want to tell you something. Normally I have a background going. I have music going. There's no music. There's an interesting non-background with a prop that my wife gave to me yesterday. This beautiful unicorn you see in front of you. Now, I noticed some interesting things about this unicorn that I wanted to point out to you. Do you see it? You see rainbows there? What's missing from this unicorn? Let's see. Is there any blue? Well, the eyes have a little tiny bit of blue, but mostly purple. Is there any red? No. Well, there's a little bit in the mane here, but it's mostly pink. It's got a yellow horn, white body, some black lines. So I guess you could find most of the rainbow on this unicorn. But I think you would say and agree with me that this unicorn, there's green, of course. This unicorn is not what you would expect from the rainbow unicorn crowd that has come to kind of represent one of the cults that is causing a lot of problems today. So, for what it's worth, thank you, my wife, for giving me a unicorn that has the colors of a rainbow that I find more pleasing than the ones that seem to be popular with some of the folks I'm not too impressed with these days. Okay, anyway, so what does all that have to do with Ascension Symptoms, spirit guides, and Plandemics? Well, first off, let's talk about what are Ascension Symptoms. There are many people who will tell you a lot of things about it, and I'm only going to be very brief in what I say. I'm going to tell you what I know about it from my personal experience, from what I've observed in others, and I'm going to tell you that you have experienced Ascension Symptoms. And I'm going to demonstrate to you how I know that. Okay, Ascension Symptoms are basically your body reacting to spiritual energies that are hitting it. Now, spiritual energies can come in the form of cosmic rays. They can come in the form of rays of energy that we can't even measure yet adequately. I think they're starting to be able to detect it. It can come in the form of almost anything that impacts you. And some of these forces are coming for you specifically, and others are targeted for other people with a different receptor. So some ascension symptoms come as a feeling of bliss, of, oh my God, I feel some kind of magic going on. I have this incredible dream that leads me on a new journey. I have a feeling that is backed up that something that's been troubling me is healing miraculously. they can just as easily be something that absolutely drives you crazy and could last an entire lifetime. But the ascension symptoms, now these are basically coded messages going to resonant souls that are giving them hints as to where to take their spiritual path. To the extent that they resonate with that soul, they align with their spiritual resonances that they've developed over many incarnations, or even the one incarnation that it may be the first one. A lot of human incarnated souls are first timers, or even zero timers who came here, winked in as a virtual soul in the middle of a lifetime of another soul who's gone off to another universe to chill out for a while. Okay, anyway, so the resonances give you the good feelings, the good inspirations, the positive things that are going to lead you to something that's personally, quote, good for you. There are resonances that are out of sync with your frequencies. They match your frequencies, but they have a different phase shift. And those, although they are resonances, will seem very discombobulating because they are not aligned with you, but they are things that you're sensitive to. They're just imagine. Well, here's a good example of how you can experience that. Take your favorite piece of music and find out if it's using the new or old musical tuning, because that's been shifted for some reason in recent times. And some people like the old tuning better, and some people like the new tuning better, and some people can't tell the difference. This is an example of how these resonances work. This shift happened so that basically two versions of every piece of music that humanity has ever invented or heard could be heard two different ways. Or perhaps heard a third way that picks up both and acts upon them equally. So I think there's actually three things behind that. And there are some souls that will benefit most from the old tuning, some souls that will benefit most from the new tuning, and some souls that will benefit from either, to give you an example. So before we end the definition of ascension systems, I'm gonna tell you how you know that you have all had ascension symptoms, even if you've not had one lately. Do you remember your parents talking to you about growing pains? Do you remember having growing pains? Do you remember what they were like? Do you remember there were certain times in your childhood where you underwent a very incredible growth spurt and your body was feeling very weird during that time? Well, those physical growth spurts are also part of the spiritual development of the human, because humans don't live in lower dimensions. There's not a human alive that isn't damaged in some way, that doesn't understand, at least by the time they get to be an adult, the three dimensions of space and the fourth dimension of time to some extent. Those growing pains are a reflection of your process of working through those earlier dimensions. And if you've ever really watched a baby develop closely, watched a child develop their formative years closely, as I have, you will be able to see very, very clearly when they start thinking and acting in higher dimensions. And fully understanding them, being able to have memories, to sort out real memories from what may be spiritual memories. And if you've ever known a child who had any recollection of past lives or had memories, maybe you've had, of having paranormal powers. I did. I remember distinctly up until sometime in my teens having a sense that I could levitate freely or climb walls if I wanted to. Really weird stuff. And later on, I looked back on it and I thought, that can't be anything real. It was just, I used to be a bigger dreamer than I am now. And it's true, I was a bigger dreamer than I am now, and rarely do I have dreams that I remember anymore. Generally, when I do, it's a very special one, especially in the last roughly 4 years since my spiritual awakening acceleration started. So that's basically what ascension symptoms are. And I can tell you that many people are experiencing new waves of ascension symptoms in recent years, more and more people. And these are very discombobulating if they're out of synchronization with you. They make you feel very odd and uncomfortable and can cause symptoms like very much like a cold or a flu or a COVID. So yeah, next time you think you have a new variant, you might want to reevaluate how you interpret that. Especially if you get, have you ever had what they used to call the 1-day flu? I know that's what they called it in my country. You get sick for a day and like a flu-like symptoms, and then it's completely gone the next day, and it's like, okay, it must have been food poisoning, or it must have been this, it must have been that. It was discombobulating and uncomfortable, but I'm glad it didn't last as long as a real cold or a real flu. Ascension symptoms. What does this have to do with spirit guides? Now, if you talk to some of the people that are really engaged with their ascension symptoms, they will talk about having spirit guides that are starting to talk to them, starting to help them with this ascension process, with becoming a more spiritual being, helping them with their enlightenment, helping them with their problems, giving them new missions to be a healer, a shaman, or creator of a new company that suddenly becomes very successful or whatever, or doesn't. There's a lot of people that will tell you that they have spirit guides. And I'm telling you that that's a related phenomenon. Because spiritual influence, all spiritual influence, are basically just another form of ascension symptom. When I talk to you, the words I shared with you today, the interesting, never before heard, possibly version of that little prayer in Sundanese could give you ascension symptoms. And if it does and you don't like it, and, I'm sorry, that's karma. Nobody forced you to listen to me. I didn't know what effect it was going to have on you, good or bad. I just compare it with you. This is basically how all communication is spiritual in nature. And we humans just have a very new and unique way of spiritual communication, using languages instead of grunts, instead of mantras. Oh my God. And some of those words have power, used to have power, maybe will have power again, and others are falling on deaf ears. I think anyone who is well attuned to music, as most spiritual people are, knows the power of music. Anyone that has a good appreciation for comedy knows the spiritual power of laughter. And I don't think there's a human soul, a real human soul out there, not one masquerading as human perhaps, that doesn't know the power of crying. And the release one gets from opening up the tear ducts once in a while. Okay, so that's how spirit guides relate to this topic. What's a plandemic? I suppose you've heard that term, and it's something that'll probably get you labeled as a conspiracy theorist and perhaps blocked and sent to Never Never Land, the Never Never Land of the internet that is becoming a popular place to send those who aren't the right kind of woke. Awakening. Is an awakening like an ascension? Yes. When is an awakening not an ascension? When what you're waking up to is somebody's programming, somebody's spiritual messages that are crafted without much spiritual intent. And this is where we need to come back to one of the trends in modern times, postmodern times, has been the desire to kill God, the desire to kill the ego, the God within us, the individual consciousness that makes us who we are. There are forces at work on humanity, still at work at humanity, that doesn't want us to ascend, that doesn't want humanity to become another God species. Well, you can imagine if I was already a God species and it gave me a certain amount of power, I wouldn't want a new competitor on the block, especially one that I'd come to find out was the real chosen species of the Gaia experiment, which is the central planet of a bigger experiment that's happened in this solar system, which you can learn much about from the Sumerian tablets, much more than you'll find in the Bible, which is in turn a piece of a larger experiment that involves the whole Milky Way galaxy. And it goes all the way back to the Big Bang. Now, I've talked about this elsewhere, but I'll just give you the punchline in case you haven't found my other works. What's going on here? What's really going on? God was the first consciousness who figured out a solution to creation that didn't get himself killed by some other consciousness, didn't get himself canceled in whatever way you can cancel people in the original version of the spiritual world. And what I'm telling you, what I'm telling you all the time, is everything, real, imaginary, spiritual, physical, is all a reflection of souls. Souls are what the multiverse is made of, big and small. And in fact, the human body is a collection of souls, a collection of collections, in fact. Each organ has its own oversoul. And that's why Ascension symptoms manifest as headaches, or can manifest as, oh, well, my arm hurts today, or can manifest as, I've got chest pains, I'm having trouble breathing. Why would any spiritual being start? Thank you. Ma just came in with some food. Terima kasih. Why would any spiritual being that valued God, or at least valued God's first child, karma, yep, karma was the first. If you didn't get that from any, I lied about that. I didn't lie about it. I just didn't know about it yet in my books, and I'm not changing the parts of the books that are in error because I think it's important for you to see the progress of revelation in my mind. So you won't feel so bad if you go down a blind alley during your ascension, which you will, because ascension is not a one-hit process. Okay? These fifth dimension people that say, oh, I've hit the fifth dimension, I'm better than the rest of humanity. My God, you've just made one level beyond what everybody gets. And there are 12 levels at present, because that's as far as God has gotten in his plan. There are going to be more. The next phase of the plan is going to get us to 16 after we finish 12. And I don't know. I like 16. It's a nice number base to work within. Very easy for counting. It's what we use in software development, hexadecimal. Another of humanity's inventions that wouldn't probably have occurred to a god who had the power to build pyramids by thought, by sound, by any of the methods that we're positing, got these strange megalithic structures up that are more advanced in their building technique, their craftsmanship, their alignments, etc., than anything that came after, until even modern times. Architects, material specialists look at these things and it's like, I don't think we could do that today, at least not without Herculean effort and, kind of like similar to what it would take to send a space shuttle up. I mean, it's that weird. And every day we're finding more and more evidence of these older civilizations. Uh, and I'll mention that there's the oldest one not far from here. I'm in Bandung, Indonesia. And if you heard of a place called Gunung Padang, you will know that this is among the leading edge black sheep of the archaeological community and anthropological community and geologic community, one of many places that seems to have a very, very, very old set of structures on it that people mistook for just another mountain. And that site is I think it's only been discovered in the last 10 years and is being actively explored now. And in fact, one of the mentors of my path that helped me learn about these things was just here recently, Graham Hancock. And I said hi to him on Facebook and, asked if he had any extra time because on his trip to talk to somebody that's also very interested and happens to live here. Unfortunately, he didn't, but I'm guessing he probably will at some point. Want to talk to this crazy Dutchman who's supposed to be, by DNA, an Englishman, and Frenchman, and German. Three of the countries that seem to have the most European sense of manifest destiny, of maybe harboring the bloodline of the Messiah. I don't know. I'm having fun at this point, but I need to wrap it up soon. What haven't I covered? Well, what more do we need to say about Plandemics? As you'll find from other pieces of my work, what essentially was going on with the whole Garden of Eden thing, the forbidden fruit, was the first man and woman, only one of which was earthborn and was the result of previous hybridization. The hybridization, the reptilian species that had one of the earlier chosen species get planted on Earth. And the ones that set up the secret biolab, the secret reptilian biolab, that was the Garden of Eden, where they were looking for an antidote to what they saw as a deadly virus, deadly disease, illness, pathogen feature of another species that was looking to wipe them out. And what happens when species are challenged by another species? They tend to wipe out the species that is challenging them. They might even wipe out part of their own species if they thought that their own species was challenging their existential future or their, beloved DNA. And as I've told you in other segments, and I'll tell you again, DNA is not the be-all, end-all of your existence. It is one of those tools invented by one of the God species to make it easier to spread their disease, their virus, their culture to the rest of, they've only managed to hit this galaxy so far, but if the Borg get their way, which they won't, They will turn the entire universe into a hive mind, all run by the Queen of Heaven, who I refer to as Lilith. Nice gal, but boy, has she earned a lot of karma. Okay, back to that little story about karma. So God's first child was karma. Why? Because that first child was his brainchild before any physical creation ever happened. And karma was the first virtual soul. I talk a lot about virtual souls, as I used to be telling you that was the secret invention that humanity was designed to give to creation. Well, actually, that's not such a big secret. Virtual souls go all the way back to the Big Bang. They go all the way back to before the Big Bang, when God and karma kicked back and forth all the ideas that they disagreed about until they decided that they were a mature enough couple to have children. Imagine if you could date for an eternity before you had to decide to get married and have kids. That's what God and karma did before. What was the Big Bang then? Tell me, oh wizard of wizards, Mr. Princeton graduate school physics dropout. The Big Bang was kind of like an explosion. That's why they call it the Big Bang. That resulted in this expanding universe we live in, and which has some interesting characteristics I don't know if you're aware of, but I'll make sure you're aware of now, is mostly composed of what we consider positive matter. And antimatter, negative matter, is something that seems to be only easily produced by very rare cosmic ray events or in reactors, accelerators like CERN in Europe, Fermilab, where I actually worked for a summer way back when, down in the main ring, getting my radiation dose every day, so we could, some weeks, be kicked out of work early and go watch the Cubs lose. Oh, God, the memories. At any rate, one of the theories that scientists have posited about the Big Bang is that it was two-pole. That if there was a Big Bang of positive matter, the negative matter must be in this other universe that was equal and opposite reaction to what we see of the Big Bang. And that's exactly how karma works. And that's exactly how virtual souls and virtual universes work. Because each universe represents a oversoul of that universe. Now, who would be mature enough to promote to an oversoul? Well, either the smartest or the dumbest children God had, depending on what the purpose of that universe was. Now, if you were going to test karma in its first version, you'd pick about the dumbest children you had. And God had other children in the spirit world before he and karma decided to get married, to hook up and have these first real kids. And the first test involved the smartest and the dumbest souls that they'd had to deal with so far in their previous mind creations before the Big Bang. Those are the those are the two you'd pick if you wanted to do this first test of real karma, this first training simulation for souls. And that's how it all started. And one of those souls was Lucifer, and the other was, I call him Lucifer. He's got a lot of different names. Okay, and he's learned a lot in the process and has become another very senior creator, a very smart guy. In fact, I think he might have been the smartest of these other senior children and was chosen for that reason. The dumbest was, unfortunately, Lilith. And, yeah, the prototype for the female. And I know that really hurts to hear if you're a woman, but this is a fact. And it's a fact that's borne out by our culture because women are absolutely the most susceptible to mind control programming that happens on media, the internet, everywhere. Because all you have to do is hit them in the heartstrings and they melt like blubber. And they know how to do that. Those who would manipulate humanity. And that works on men too, of course, because men are physically masculine. But as any real man knows, we have our feminine side too. And the best men are the ones who balance their feminine and masculine side most effectively. They make the best husbands. They make the best fathers. And to the extent that a woman thinks rationally about finding a mate, that's what she's looking for. She's not looking for an alpha male. She's not looking for a beta male. She's looking for they call it a sigma male, but I think I would call it an omega male. Alpha, omega. Anyway, I could go on and on. I'm going to be publishing a new edition of my book very soon. I've got the rough draft done, and I've got some days of proofreading ahead of me that I'm hoping to get accomplished during Ramadan and get this out by my birthday, which happens to fall in Ramadan on April 21st. So look for that if you want to hear more on this subject. Till then, this is Rob Trump at the Omnist Hour. Do I want to whore myself by asking for likes, shares, and subscribes? God. If you find my channel, God bless you. It's either the worst channel on YouTube or the hardest to find via algorithms because I've got the fewest subscribers of anybody that's podcasting, I think, in the universe right now. But anyway, I love you, whoever is tuning in, and I love my new family, my new Islamic family in Indonesia, and the greater Islamic family worldwide that I now am having a new appreciation for, and a new understanding of your brand of fundamentalism, which I don't have much appreciation for any more than I do for really hardcore Christian fundamentalists that would start another crusade to defend their faith. We don't need any more crusades. We don't need any more world wars. We don't need any of this crap that the folks that don't realize this experiment is done and we need to get on to the next phase are trying to pull. And actually, I will mention, and one more thing in closing, this is a prayer drink. I learned in my Indonesian travel that, at least in the Indonesian version of Islam, and I expect the others, that rather than communion with wine or any other substance, their communion is good old water. And the way it works is whenever you're doing something religious, which there's a lot of things that are religious. I mean, Muslims, if they're very religious, pray 5 times a day, starting at 4 a.m., which has been hard for me, but actually fits well with the way my nights usually go. I usually wake up between 3 and 4 thinking revelatory thoughts, especially in certain times where these revelations are coming more fast and furious. Ascension symptoms. At any rate, I had prayer for my wife to relieve her ascension symptoms last night. And to all those who listened to that prayer, this is a reminder of the covenant that we sealed last night. And I'm renewing with whoever's watching this, and I ask you to pray for all who are suffering from ascension symptoms that they don't need to be suffering from viruses they don't need to be suffering from vaccines they don't need to be suffering from. And pray for the souls of those who created them, thinking that they were doing God's work. Here's to you. You've got to drink it all. Whatever container it's given to, I mean, they use these little tiny plastic one-serving containers oftentimes. You'll see, like downstairs getting prepared for Ramadan, we've got all these little snacks and little one-serving containers for anybody that comes by during Ramadan when it's okay to eat. And that's essentially the Ramadan communion set. Islam's not that different from Christianity, folks, or Judaism, or any other religion. Just have different ways of communion, different names for God, different understandings of God's plan. So, bless you all, and come back again to the Omnis Tower. Thanks.